Things are changing, but all of our lives we've been conditioned into a particular way of viewing black people by the media. We have decades of that conditioning to undo, and I do mean we. I have, in the past, and I'm not ruling it out in the future, been susceptible to unconscious bias myself. I'm not ashamed to admit it, and you shouldn't be either. But what would be shameful would be if you recognised it and did nothing to change your thinking. What this resolution calls for is all governments of the UK, I have my doubts about some of them, to run public awareness campaigns about unconscious racial bias. Get all of us thinking and talking and addressing how we got to that stage and show them how to undo the years of conditioning.
I'm not a royalist, I'm a Republican, a socialist, I'm not getting invited to the Buckingham Palace garden party anytime soon, but the fact that allowed us to make that discussion point about unconscious bias was why we wanted to bring this to conference. Let's have an honest discussion about where we are with racism. We tend to think that because we're all Jack Tampson's bairns, there's often been a minimising of the problem that we generally have. But I can tell you that pretty much most BME people I know have had daily microaggressions, little experiences of racism. I'll give you one. People unconsciously, subtly have these things in them because we are born into a racist society. All of us have this, by the way. Me too. You know, we all have it because our country has this history of white supremacy and racism and imperialism. So if we want to decode that, dismantle it, decolonize it, we have to name it and shame it and actually work out what these institutions are and how they work. Unconscious bias is part of institutionalized patterns of discrimination. We have to look at the institutions, try to dismantle them a bit and actually move on from it because we're tackling the problem directly and naming it honestly and having an honest discussion about it. This applies obviously across all discriminations. But I wanted to sort of really finish my remarks by saying this, my own experience, I suppose. I'm very confident that the future of Scotland will be a very non-racial and anti-racist country because we are grappling with rejecting an imperialist British viewpoint of what a nation is and what it can be. We're rejecting an ethnocentric definition of what that nation is. We're setting an example of civic nationalism and inclusion, which means that we have a national identity which is going to be different. It's not going to be what it is now. We're preparing a future where people can define a Scots person non-racially. But for that to be possible, the reality of the inequality economically in the labour market, you know, I look at my own council, we have 15% BME people in the city, but I only have less than 3% in the workforce. That cannot be right. There's institutional mechanisms that are stopping people getting work in my local authority. And I'm sure that's true with public bodies across this country. So the rhetoric is good. Our rhetoric is unmatched. Our laws are brilliant, but they've got to match with the practical outcomes that happen in the wider society. And if there are barriers, if there are institutions that are stopping people, we need to remove them and be conscious of the fact of the need to remove them.
I'm an elected councillor in Renfrewshire, where 0.8% of the population are not white, and I am the only BAME councillor in that area. Of the hate crime that is in the general society in the area, 50%, slightly over 50% of that is racism. That's a shocking statistic of all the hate crime. So just please remember on your doorstep, even those that are self-actualised and recognise it is there, and that is that unconscious bias that we're talking about.